Hi, welcome to the latest edition of the Wellbeing Show. I'm recording here with Anthony Mohr, who's a retired senior judge in California, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his life. Before we jump into that conversation, just want to remind you, this is a recording, so don't actually call me because I don't know what I'll be doing, but it will go out as usual on a Wednesday evening in the UK at 9 p.m. If you do have any questions or any thoughts or any issues that come up, do ping them over to me on my mobile, my cell phone, if you're an American, which is +44 7506 319 745. If you've got any questions for Tony, I'm sure he'd be delighted to receive them. And I can pass them on to him. But send them on WhatsApp to me, and then I can sort of get back to you. Or indeed, just put them underneath one of the platforms that we're streaming on. Put your questions there. We check them regularly, and we can come back to you with answers. So that's enough of that. With that, I'm just going to say hi, Tony. How you doing?
Very well, thanks, Noel. How are you?
Good. We're at opposite ends of the day, I think. You're over in California, just starting your day, and ours is
It's 6 minutes.
beginning to
Yeah,
wind in.
it's 6 minutes after 8 o'clock. Thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. I saw the title of your book and the little write-up on you, and I thought I must have you on. I'd bring you on. So you're over in California, I believe, at the moment.
Correct.
Right. And you've lived there all your life, I think, haven't you, apart from a short period of time?
Born and raised, other than college and law school, I've always lived here. I
Right.
did spend 1 year in Sweden from age 7 to 8 when my dad was working over there, but otherwise, this has been home.
Great. I mean, I have to say, California is one of my favorite places. I go there regularly. I was over there in summer with my boy and giving him his first taste of it. It is an incredible place. It's one of those quite extraordinary places, and people who don't know it don't know this, but you can go skiing in the morning and surfing in the afternoon in California.
Right.
It really is.
Everybody says it, but it's true.
It's the absolute truth. And it's also, if you go from the southern end, San Diego, up to the northern end in San Francisco, it's quite a huge, varied series of cultures and
Right.
temperate climate in the north and more in the desert on the inland and so on. But it is extraordinary place.
And what you said, Noel, was you can, from the south to San Francisco in the north. San Francisco is really in the central part of the state.
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
a lot of state left between San Francisco and the Oregon border.
That's right. It is. I mean, it's huge, isn't it? It's one of the largest economies on the planet, single economies on the planet. I mean, it's
Right.
like extraordinary. And in an amazing country, the US, like a lot of countries, going through its own struggles post-pandemic and the sort of extremities in views and stuff like that, which
Yeah.
we all know about at the moment. It's sort of quite a challenging times for the world, I think.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
really is. And we're not immune from it.
No, not at all. So you started, tell us a little bit about sort of your early life, because that's really sort of what you've been writing about recently.
Yeah, that's what the book is about.
Sure.
Basically, I'm the son of an actor. My dad, Gerald Mohr, was first on radio and best known for his radio work. And then TV came in right around the time I was born, within a year or two of that.
Mm.
And it was a slow adaptation, but he did it, and he began making appearances on TV shows. And then went to Europe to make this series. He actually took over the third year of a dying series, which was not the best decision in the world. I wrote about
Mm.
that in the book too,
Sure.
because to take the series, he had to give up a fabulous offer.
Hmm.
He always wanted to work in Europe, be the international man of mystery and
Yeah.
foreign intrigue. The series he took over was just that, but it only lasted one season. And to take the show, he gave up what would have been a fantastic series, uh, known as The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp.
Yeah.
And he turned that down, and Hugh O'Brien got the part.
Yeah. Yeah. And you grew up around sort of quite well-known people in a very sort of interesting and I suppose some people quite strange lifestyles, sort of What was it like for you? You were sort of around all these big characters, I guess.
I was. I mean, I wasn't around the top of the top stars of the time,
Hmm.
but I certainly met a number of them. I was probably too young to appreciate it.
Hmm.
Yeah, here I am, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. It's not like I'm walking around thinking, "Wow, I am this." I'm in this unique place in the world.
Hmm.
There's, Joan Blondell. There's Gary Cooper, Cary Grant. I was too young to appreciate that.
Sure.
Uh, I was way too young to appreciate the first woman outside my family who held me in her arms. It was Rita
Wow.
Hayworth.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
and what can I tell you? She came over to the house and did just that. But
Hmm.
that's what I'm told.
Yeah.
It may be a
Yeah.
family legend. It may not be true at all. But this is sort of something I've been told a number of times by my own mother and
Hmm.
uh, my father and my grandmother.
And
Um,
I guess at the age 7 or 8, I mean, it's still relatively unusual for Americans to travel quite a lot. I mean, it's not unusual for people in the US because it's such a huge country. People don't realize just how big it is. So
yeah,
traveling from one side of America is a bit like traveling around the globe
right,
for many people. So,
right.
but that would have been quite unusual traveling and living in Europe as an American. I wonder how that was for you because by that age you were beginning to appreciate that maybe your
I
father
we
had.
we took, we were in Sweden for about 9 or 10 months, and
Hmm.
I was in a Swedish school, so I had to learn the new language as I went along, which, frankly, was not easy. I
Yeah,
mean, it was a very difficult time.
yeah,
Uprooting from my friends in first grade, who were really nice kids at the Sherman Oaks School. I had a lot of friends there,
yeah.
and then going to this brand new place where it got dark very early. I walked to school in the dark and walk home in the dark.
Hmm.
Uh, Frankly, it made me very reluctant to go back to Europe for many years.
Did it?
Uh,
Yeah, I
yeah,
can
I
imagine.
I remember in high school they had a program where you could spend a summer in Europe. If you took French, you'd go to France. If you took
Hmm.
Spanish, you could go to Spain. And all my friends were going to go, and I wasn't that interested. And then my mom and stepfather said, "Look, you're too young. You're not really ready. We're not going to let you go." Now, you would think that I would have raised the roof, thrown a temper tantrum, yelled and screamed, and been very upset. I was fine with it. I
Yeah.
go, "That's great. Now I've got a real excuse not to go." And I told my teacher who wanted me to go, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ladick, my parents won't let me."
Hmm.
And that was perfectly fine. And even in
Hmm.
college, I would not take a semester abroad.
Right.
Um, it really took through law school before I went back to Europe.
Hmm.
Um, and until then, I just had no desire to do it. I did spend a summer in South America when
Yeah.
I was in college, because I didn't feel like going back to Europe. But
Yeah.
finally, I did it,
Yeah.
and it was wonderful. I'll tell you what really got me to want to go to Europe again. It's
Yeah.
a novel by James Michener called The Drifters.
Okay.
A wonderful book about a bunch of kids from the late 60s
Mhm.
who go over to Europe and meet each other and are running around having a great time, and it's all
Yeah.
free and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And after law school, I figured this is what I want to do.
Hmm.
So then I finally got myself together and went to Europe.
Right. So I'm interested that you had one parent, your birth father, and then you have a second father as well. I mean, this is
Right.
part of what the story is about. But your birth father lived in a particular type of world, which I understand quite well, the actor's world, and relatively bohemian, but also quite an insecure lifestyle in some
Oh, it
ways, in
is.
terms of going from job to job, and you're not quite sure, particularly in the early days,
Yeah.
that you're not quite sure. But even when you're very successful in that field, you can go away for months, literally, if you're on a set, for example.
Oh,
And
yeah. Yeah.
and
I remember Burt Lancaster, and this is much later, when
yeah,
I'm an adult.
yeah.
Uh, but I went to some banquet or something or other, which I don't remember. It was in Century City.
Mhm.
And Burt Lancaster was an honoree, and he came up and he talked. And he was very candid. He said, "I want you all to know I am available." He
Yeah,
wanted work.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
he had done, wonderful roles in wonderful movies. And here he is saying to an audience, "I'm available." What can you do?
I know. Do you think that had an impact on the sort of decisions that you ended up making in terms of, I mean, you went into a very, in many ways, very secure, hard-working field. I don't envy anybody who goes into law, to be honest. It's such hard work, but it's very secure and very stable in many ways if you sort of get into a company and so on.
Well, law is not that secure anymore.
No.
Uh, Big firms fall apart.
Yeah.
Big firms go bankrupt. The ones that you might think were the old, you know, the the rocks and pillars of the legal world are not necessarily that way.
Yeah.
I saw a number of major firms fall apart. There was one called Kaplan Livingston, which did a lot of entertainment work, and they were really right at the top. I mean, to get into that firm, you had to be a star in law school,
Mm.
and they disbanded. Pact Ross, I don't know if these names mean anything, but they were a very well-known firm, and they fell apart.
Mm.
Uh, and when I was starting law school, the firms were rock and solid. If you went to work at A, B, and C, you'd spend your life at A, B, and C.
Right.
By the time I started to practice, that was crumbling,
Right.
and it was no longer the case. And when I was working in law, I didn't really feel secure at all.
Right.
And I wasn't really sure I was in the right position, the right calling. But becoming a judge was the right calling.
Oh,
And
excellent. Right.
the judiciary is secure. You are going to get paid.
Yes.
You're not going to get sued for malpractice because there's judicial immunity. Your only responsibility is to try to do the right thing in each case that comes your way.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
love it. And I still do. I think it's a wonderful calling and a wonderful activity. And you really are doing some good for the world.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
since I became a judge in 1994, I've been a much happier person
Oh,
than I
okay.
was a lawyer.
And that was because of the security, or just because you felt like you found some meaning and purpose, as it were, or a bit of both?
All of the above, the meaning and purpose primarily,
Right.
security would be secondary, but it helps
Yeah.
because, as a lawyer, you wonder, are you going to get paid? Is your client
Yeah.
going to pay you? And too many clients refuse to pay unless you win.
Yes.
And there
Yes.
are many clients who will not pay you even if you do win. I've had cases in front of me where the lawyer, I had one, I'll never forget it. The lawyer won the case
Mm.
and the client wouldn't pay him. And finally, the lawyer sued for his fee. He deserved it.
Yeah.
The client sued him for malpractice,
Mm.
saying, you may have won, but you didn't win fast enough, which
Wow.
is an absurdity.
It is
And
absurd. It is absurd. That is.
oh,
Yeah.
that really took chutzpah, as you might want to say.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely.
The
Let's get
case
back
got
a
in
bit.
front of me, and I lectured the lawyer in front of a full courtroom.
I
And
would hope so.
I said, this is what gives the profession a bad name. How
Yeah.
dare you? And I
And
dismissed the case.
I'm quite surprised somebody would even take the case up, as in try to represent a client in those circumstances. But I guess some people do anything, won't they, really?
Oh, yeah.
At this stage
Oh,
of
yeah.
my life, I'm not surprised by human behavior.
You can find somebody to take any kind of a
I've,
case.
I've gone beyond being surprised about how human
Yeah.
beings can be. So coming back a little bit then in time. So you were growing up, you had your father, he was in this insecure profession with your mum and sort of this quite interesting lifestyle. You don't remember
Right.
much from it, do you? What was the point at which the family dynamic shifted? And we should remember that we're talking about a time when divorce and blended families were very unusual. And I'm a little bit younger than you, but similar generation. I remember when my parents divorced, I was one of the few kids that had happened to, and we had a term in those days called a latchkey child. Meaning
Right.
you had your own key, and I was one of those, and they were a thing. It was a thing. These days, it's not a thing. It's quite normal.
Right.
But
That was in the 70s. I remember the phrase latchkey kid
yes, yeah, yeah,
entered the language then.
yeah, yeah.
My folks split in 1956.
Wow, wow. That really is, yeah.
Yeah.
Although oddly enough, that post World War II period, certainly in the UK, sort of very large spike in divorces. And
Interesting.
post war initially,
Right.
whereas guys came home and of course they were carrying all sorts of psychological problems with them that were untreated from the war and so on. There was a lot
Right.
of family breakdown in sort of it's one of the highest peaks of divorce in the UK.
Well, yeah, I mean, the UK was right in the center of it all. I
Yeah,
mean, we
quite.
were bombed, London was bombed, Coventry was bombed.
Yeah, yeah,
There was,
absolutely. Yeah. So
yeah, I mean,
what was your experience like? So how did you experience that? How did your parents talk about it? What sort of was the sort of dynamic that you found yourself in? What age were you in that when that was
well, I
happening?
was 9.
Right,
Uh, I was probably 4 months into being age 9.
right.
By the way, it wasn't, there was no trauma because of the war, because my dad never went overseas and saw
Oh,
combat. He was at a studio in Santa Ana laying down radio shows for the troops. One of them was Wings to Victory, and the
oh
others I don't
wow.
recall. So, he was acting at the time. He was
Yeah.
drafted. He was drafted right before he was supposed to get a big contract to make a show and move his career upward.
Hmm.
But when he got drafted, he was practicing his field.
Yeah.
But he was just kind of a free soul, if you
Yeah.
will, a bon
Yeah. Yeah.
vivant.
Yeah.
I will lay odds that he was not exactly faithful as a husband,
Yeah.
um, because he sure wasn't in a second marriage. That I know for sure, firsthand.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
uh, and he met his second wife while married to my mother.
Yeah.
Met her in Sweden, and in keeping with wanting to be the international man, he married the Swedish girl.
Hmm.
But in any case, uh, it was a shock. I mean, I never heard of such a thing. And my parents sat me down one day. It was in the living room. I had a slight cold. I do remember that. And they talked about not living together anymore, but I am still your father, and you'll still see me from time to time.
Mm.
And I didn't know what they were talking about. Just didn't register.
Yeah.
And it didn't register for quite a while. But then suddenly the next day, my father's not there. And he's not there the day after that or the day after that. And breakfast is a silent meal. Dinner is a silent meal. The irony, which of course I didn't appreciate at the time, was his mother, my grandmother, had always been living with us in a little granny flat in the back. And she didn't move out. See, here's my mother living with the mother of the man who left her for another woman.
Wow. Wow.
And
That's
I
really
didn't,
quite. Yeah.
yeah, and this didn't connect. Grandma was grandma, and she was there, and I didn't kind of, appreciate what was going on in terms of the relationships. Eventually, she moved out. It would have been about almost another year
Mm.
when my mother said, "Look, this isn't right, Henny. You've got to go." And
Mm.
Henny didn't want to go. Rita, I
Yeah.
love
Yeah.
you. I love my grandson. And Rita said, "Look, I'm sorry. you know, you've got to go." And so she found herself an apartment in Hollywood, um, a little studio apartment, and off she went.
Mm.
It was a very sad, upsetting time. I
Yeah.
remember, I remember there was like a little hole in my universe, if you will, more than a
Sure.
little hole. It was like
Oh,
yawning maw,
yeah.
and it wasn't pleasant.
Had you felt close to your father? I mean, had it been that type of
Yeah.
relationship where you felt
Oh
close?
yeah. Oh
Right.
yeah. We had fun together. He took me, on some sets when he was working. He got me on a kids show. Uh, One of his good friends was a producer, a guy named Al Ganaway, who put on this little kids show called Half Pint Panel. I was
Mm.
on it twice. Um, I had met Red Skelton, went down and watched him film one of those shows.
Sure. Sure.
And we hiked around. There was an area called Vasquez Rocks, which was a location for many westerns, and it's a park. You can go up there and hike, and we did that together.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, he was an active father, not as much as at the very beginning. I mean, I would say in the first few years he was busy. I didn't see that much of him. He was away,
Yeah.
but starting at age, after we got back from Europe, yeah, he
Yeah.
was he was there. So there was definitely a gap that opened up. But
And the,
ironically, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, no, I'm just wondering, did that contact, was it maintained or maintainable, or did it sort of
That
peel
was
off
where I
as it
was
were?
I was exactly
Yeah.
going there. He actually became more of a pal, and I'm quoting the word pal because he kept saying after the divorce, we're going to be pals, and he was. The contact got stronger after the divorce.
Wow.
he made a point of coming over every other weekend,
Right.
and we do things together. And we started talking a lot and discussing all the issues of the day, and that continued all the way up until he died.
That's extraordinary because it's long before, as you know, the idea of contact orders and splitting time and now co-parenting, etc. And so they were sort of in many ways figuring this out without any sort of roadmap or blueprint for it, really.
Mhm.
How was your mum around all of this? Was she supportive of the relationship with him? I mean, it must have been quite difficult for her, I guess.
Oh, I think he was. I know she was upset and scared after the divorce.
Yeah.
She was very nervous, very upset. Before the divorce, I don't remember yelling, screaming, fighting, anything like that.
Hmm.
But I used to like to draw cartoons, and I still have them. And what I notice is every time two adults interact in the cartoon, there's fire and flames coming out of their
Wow.
mouths, their nostrils,
Really?
or yeah,
Really?
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So clearly I was onto something.
Yes, quite. It's really interesting. I have some art therapy friends who've worked with children through use of art.
Yeah,
And children don't want to talk about difficult things, but when you give them art materials, they draw them.
yeah,
And
yeah.
they will say to you, "Oh, there's no problem. There's no problem," because they can't verbalize it. They don't want to verbalize it, but it definitely comes out in the artwork. So,
Noel, I cannot remember a single fight between my mother
wow.
and father. I don't
Wow.
remember any shouting or anything.
Yeah.
Okay. But the cartoons, reveal a lot more.
You essentially
Something,
it's really interesting because I do a lot of work with families as in my field, obviously. And I do say to parents, you think your kids don't know, but they know.
yeah,
They always know. And
they do.
and you have to just be open with your children in an age appropriate way, in a way that doesn't frighten them.
Right.
Because they can pick up on stuff.
Yeah.
They're sensitive to it. And I guess you were as well. You were sort of I mean, I guess your parents were very civilized. They didn't want to fight in front of you,
Right.
etc. Which is great. I mean, of course, that's right.
They were civilized.
Yeah,
I don't remember any name calling or anything and all that. My mother was candid about my father, but much later when I was, into my teens.
sure. So they
And
were thinking they were hiding it from you. They kept it away from you, but actually somehow you were picking up on it. It was coming out in
correct. Yeah, I would say
and
that's right.
yeah, I mean, it's still sort of. I wonder how did you deal with it at school? Did school know? Did you tell them? Did they were they aware? And how did other kids respond? Or was it just something in the family?
I don't remember being ostracized at school because of the divorce.
Sure.
Not at all. I did have friends in that would have been the third grade was pre-divorce, fourth and fifth grade afterwards, and we stayed together. The classes stayed together at the Sherman Oaks School through those times.
Yeah.
Uh, and I had a lot of friends in the class. They were very nice people. I mean, they were nice to me. I was like nice to them. Um, I remember being best of friends with the two brightest guys that I thought were in the classroom.
Right.
And there were a bunch of us who came over to my house after school, and we played kickball in the backyard and things like that. That
Wow.
was a lot of fun. I remember though that in the fourth grade, I probably had some behavior problems because I still have the
Yeah.
report cards. And my report card from the third grade is almost all A's and, outstanding in quote deportment, citizenship as they
Yeah.
called it. And they
Yeah.
had a whole bunch of, categories for citizenship.
Yeah.
And every one of them was outstanding.
Yeah.
We get to the fourth grade, everything was quote satisfactory.
Okay.
It dropped. It wasn't unsatisfactory, but it dropped down to satisfactory, and some of the grades dropped down as well.
And that's
So I
a classic sign in children at school when things drop off. It doesn't necessarily need to be dramatic, as you say, but there's a change.
yeah,
And you see a change, and then you know that a child is experiencing something difficult. That because, and
yeah,
then they don't necessarily verbalize it. Again, like with your cartoons, you didn't necessarily talk about it, but it was there in your behavior.
correct,
Um, and
correct.
did the
In the fifth,
schools did the
I'm
school
sorry.
say anything to you? Did the school talk to you about it or anything like that?
Not officially. In
Yeah.
fact, In the fourth grade, they wanted to skip me. They asked me to skip a semester, which was shocking, given
Right.
what was going on.
Yeah.
And I was very scared and nervous about it, and I turned it down.
Okay.
I talked to my mother about it, and we decided, no, I'm going to stay in the fourth grade. And so I told them, and they were okay with the decision. That was fine.
Yeah.
But then my mother moved to New York because she had family there. That's where she came from.
Okay.
And so midway through the fifth grade, we moved to New York, and it was a brand new school with kids who were actually kind of friendly. I'm still very friendly with one of them because she ended up moving out to California later. But the teacher we had was just a horrible beast. Miss
Oh,
Hay, she was the worst.
really? Oh, dear.
Insulting, rude, demeaning, venal, you name it, she was. And everybody agrees. Everybody has that to say about her. But starting in the sixth grade, we had a wonderful teacher. But
Right.
then in the sixth grade, my mother remarried. The guy was from California. That was Stan. Back we went.
Okay. And how was that when your mum remarried? I mean, did that cause any sort of conflict for you about who is this person? How were you introduced to it?
Well, Noel, I wanted her to get married again because I knew she was unhappy.
Okay, right. Right.
She could have married Godzilla, and I would have been happy. I mean, anybody who came along, I would want her to marry. The Wolf Man, it didn't matter. I wanted to just see her married again.
Okay, great.
And I remember there was this one guy, Dr. Glass, who was kind of this reedy little twerp.
Right.
God knows what he treated his patients, but I wanted her to marry him because at least there's a guy in her life, Dr. Glass. It didn't work out. But then right after Dr. Glass, she was introduced to Stan.
Okay.
And Stan was living in Los Angeles, it turned
Right.
out.
Yeah.
And a mutual friend had put them together.
Yeah.
And I was there when they met. I was there the first day in
Really?
New York. We took the Staten Island ferry, and
Okay.
he was a nice guy. And he really made it a point of drawing me into the dates. I mean, they'd go out alone to dinner and things like
Cool.
that.
Yes. Yes.
But during the day, I was there and I was kind of enjoying him. It was different from my father. He seemed
Yeah.
a little more taciturn, a little more strict, much more conservative,
Yeah.
not as not the bon vivant that my father was.
Yeah.
But it worked out, and I was kind of hoping they'd get married, and they did, and I was very happy about that.
Right.
And
And what did Stan do? What was he doing then? What was
he
his sort
was
of
in
background?
business. He had his own company that made
What?
business machines.
Right.
And whatever they might be, machines that help businesses out.
Yeah.
The big triumph, which occurred right around the time that my mother and Stan were seeing each other, was he partnered with the Bank of America.
Yeah.
And the Bank of America was going to bring out a credit card, which was the Bank of America.
Okay. Yeah. The big one. That's right. Yeah. Absolutely.
And they used Stan to make all the machines that imprinted them and embossed them.
Okay.
The embossers put your name on the card.
Yeah.
The imprinters were used when you went to the store to buy something, and they slap the card on and run the handle across it. And then there was a slip of paper. You'd sign that, and that was the charge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those machines came from Stan, the imprinter and the embosser.
Wow.
So he partnered, and he was really one of the credit card pioneers, if you will.
Right.
And
So
Bank
he's a very successful guy. A very successful guy.
Bank of America is now Visa.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And for people who are too young to understand this, it used to be a mechanical process cards, sort of not like it is now on the phone and stuff like that. So
no, nothing. I mean, back then, with every week, I think it was, or every month, the merchant would get a little booklet.
Yeah.
And it had the numbers of cards that were delinquent and canceled.
Yeah.
And so they would open the booklet and check your card number. And if your card number was there, they'd say, we're sorry, we can't take your card. If it wasn't there, they would do it. The problem, of course, is it took a few days before your card got into that booklet if you were cheating. And so if you found or stole a credit card, you knew you had 1 to 2 weeks to charge everything you wanted to charge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But of course, so you were I suppose 10, 9 or 10 now when you
I
meet.
was 11 when they remarried.
11 when they
Yeah,
remarried. And you were happy because she was happy, and
right.
then you were going back to California. You knew California, so
New
I guess,
California. We weren't going back to the Valley. I wasn't going to, not to Sherman Oaks. We moved to
yeah,
Beverly Hills.
yeah.
And so that was a brand new world, if you will.
I
But I
mean,
was in California.
did that mean you had then more access to your birth father as well?
Right,
Because he was still in California acting and pursuing his
right.
career. So I guess you welcomed that move back.
I did. I
Yeah,
did. We resumed the every other weekend protocol.
right. And so how was that? Because again, there wouldn't have been that many kids doing that at that point. Nowadays, it might be more normal, but you're still plowing that furrow. And how was it for you to sort of have these two fathers, as it were? And how did they negotiate it? Because I guess there was some conversation that went on about, uh,
Minimal,
right,
minimal, generally via my mother.
right, right.
My father would pull up to the house in front of the curb. Out I'd go with my little duffel bag or whatever, get in
Yeah.
the car, take off on Friday afternoon, back Sunday evening.
That was like every other weekend you were with your birth father,
Correct.
and then you would sort of alternate. And you never really saw Stan and your father have a chat about these things or get to know each
I
other?
don't remember them ever talking.
Wow.
They may
Wow.
have, but I don't remember them ever talking. My mother talked to him,
Yeah.
but Stan didn't. They were,
Yeah.
they were ships in the night that passed without any communication.
And so your mum, I guess, set the tone in terms of what was happening for you as a child. She was the main
Right.
driving force of the parenting decisions, I guess.
Right. Well, Stan made a lot of parenting decisions,
Did he?
in conversation with my mother.
Yeah.
But they together did things, and Stan had a different. I'm going to sneeze. Excuse
Go for it.
me. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
They made parenting decisions, but Stan was much stricter than my father. He wanted, his kid. He had two children of his own, and I
Okay.
dropped in the middle in terms of ages. And he wanted us to work and have jobs and do things, which I'm going to say. Excuse
There
me.
you go. Don't worry.
I don't know what's going on here. I think it's allergies.
Yeah.
Um, but they made the parenting decisions together. But my
Were
mother
you
really,
were you close to these step siblings? How did you all negotiate that?
at the begin, well, Skip was 5 years older, and
Right.
I always wanted a brother. Did not want to be an only child. So
Yeah.
here comes a brother, and he moved in almost immediately
Okay.
because Stan's ex-wife was a real piece of work. She was an alcoholic and
Ouch.
just a real problem. And
Yeah.
Skip wanted out of there as quickly as he could be. He was 16, so gall darn it, he's out. He
Yeah.
packed up,
Yeah.
boom, he was with
Yeah.
us.
Right.
Leslie was 2 years younger,
Yeah.
so she's 9, and she's going to stay with her mother. Although she didn't want to live there, she really wanted to come over and live with Stan and the rest of us. But
Yeah.
Stan said, "No, it's your mother. You've got to stay," which was a source of unhappiness to her. Because, for example, Stan would, gave her spousal support and child support. And I think she just used it for liquor or whatever because she wouldn't buy Leslie clothes.
Yeah.
And Leslie would come over to the house for her weekends. So she did the every other weekend routine as well.
Mhm.
And, she'd come over and, my mother would say, "You look like a ragamuffin."
Yeah.
That's one of her words. And
Yeah.
Stan would get on the phone and, with Martha, the ex, and say, "Is this how you send her to school? Aren't you buying her clothes? I send you money." And Stan refused to take Leslie shopping for clothes. He
Right.
said, "That's your mother's job. I send her money. She's the one to do it." Well, guess what? She didn't do it. And so poor Leslie actually got herself a job, some boring job as a file clerk, to
Mm.
get money to buy herself clothes.
Okay. How did
Now,
you feel about that? That's quite a strange set of siblings to suddenly arrive in your life.
well, as I said, with Skip, I was delighted.
Yeah.
Leslie and I began with classic sibling rivalry.
Okay.
It was like, okay, I don't want this little girl running around, bothering me or whatever. But we did draw close, and within probably 2 years, we were very close. And by the time I got into high school, We were sharing friends. She was going out with a couple of my friends. I went out with one of her friends,
Mhm.
actually two, though one of them was poisonous. I'm glad I didn't go any further with her because the next guy made her pregnant.
Yeah.
But in any case, excuse me. Um, but we got along extremely well. She was very involved with two of my good close friends, one in high school and one in college.
Mm.
And we're still very close. Same with Skip, the older brother.
Yeah.
So it was a real good alloy, if you will.
And so you became over time quite close as a sort of cohesive family unit, which is what
Right.
happens, I guess, with kids when you blend them together when
Yeah.
they're around each other. You sort of do form the relationship, don't you?
Correct. Stan had the talent of blending the families. You got to hand it
Right.
to him. He did it very, very well.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And that's long before we had these terms or
Right.
these sort of understandings of them. But it's interesting, and I don't know what you think about this because the sort of nuclear family ideal, mum, dad, 2.5 kids, or whatever it is supposed to be, we're supposed to have.
Yeah.
Only ever, in terms of the actual statistics, only ever max out at about a third of the families, really. So it was an ideal, but it was never a reality as such. And sort of these types of blended families are much more the norm culturally, anyway. Um,
Right.
but they certainly
But
weren't projected as such, were they?
yeah. But Noel, I mean, back in Sherman Oaks when I
Yeah.
was in the Valley, and then again in high school, um, the vast majority of the kids came from an intact nuclear family.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, maybe they weren't getting along very well,
Yeah.
which is something I didn't really know because people were pretty quiet, especially in Beverly Hills. There was a real discretion. People didn't wander around the school talking about their parental problems.
Yeah.
Maybe they did to their closest friends. Uh, I was never turned down, rejected, or teased because of the divorce. To my knowledge, no girl refused to go out with me because of the divorce.
Right.
Um, that may well have been because I didn't date very much and plenty of girls said no. But, to my knowledge, nobody said no because you're a divorced kid, if
Right.
you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but, and
I
there
mean,
were,
just for my guess, because they may not know. I mean, Beverly Hills is quite a closeted community, even to this day. It's still sort of quite a stratified set of social norms. So I guess in those days it really was sort of very,
well, back then it was a small town.
yeah,
It may have been surrounded by Los Angeles, but it was like Mayberry
yeah,
from the Andy Griffith Show. It was, um, and in school, at least among the guys, money didn't matter because everybody was, comfortable enough.
yeah,
You good enough in terms of the amount of money you had. So, if your parents had $100,000 for argument's sake in assets, and the next person down the road had $1 million in assets, it didn't really matter, at least among my friends. We never talked about it. We just knew we were comfortable.
yeah,
I told some of the girls for them, it did matter. Some of them came to school with different outfits every day and never repeated a wardrobe. Um, I was really oblivious as far as clothing goes.
sure,
Uh,
sure,
Even with Leslie's problems, I was oblivious. I didn't want to go to a clothing store and buy clothes. My mother was always pushing me to go pick up a new shirt, a new pair of pants, and I just didn't want to do it. I found it to be a crashing bore.
mm,
Um, but of course, she would get the clothes. Whatever I had was appropriate, thanks to her.
yeah,
And but it just made no difference to me. And so I never went to school and said, "Oh, such and such has got a better jacket, a better suit. Kathy has a better dress than Alice, or something like that." It just
yeah.
didn't cross my mind.
So, I mean, it's interesting because I think that when I look back at my parents and their divorce and my stepfather, Alf, coming into our life, um,
Right.
the adults around me just managed the situation. That's what happened. And they sort of focused on us and made sure we were okay. Alf had his own children who I know, but he inherited 5 Irish Catholic children. I don't know.
Right.
Well done, Alf. I'm not sure I would be that
Well
close.
done, Al.
Sort of
Right.
like looking back, I don't know how you do that.
Bully for you, Al.
Well, quite exactly,
Right.
Um,
Right.
And it sounds like the adults around you did that for you kids. They just got on with it. Whatever was going on for them, they did the best they could and they normalized it. And you didn't notice a deficit at all.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know from your description there were problems. Your cartoons were showing it. In the early days of the divorce, your performance dropped off, etc. I'm interested as you reflect upon this experience now, and you've had this opportunity through writing your books. Um, what do you think is the lasting impact of these life experiences upon you, particularly thinking about yourself as a judge who's having to
Right.
look at people coming in, people from a very different background to you,
Sure.
and then having to sort of try and make sense of what's happening in your courtroom, in the judiciary, and so on and so forth. And sort of, what do you think, on balance, would be the impact on you as a human being? Because you are a successful career guy. You've done very well. You got to the top of your profession, etc. Despite some difficult and uncomfortable things happening. On reflection, what's your sort of assessment?
Good question. Well, look, first I would say this. Back then, people didn't talk about their problems. People
Yeah,
internalized their things. As one of my friends said many, many years later, a kid I knew literally from birth, and we're still friends. He said, "Look, our parents are running around having a great time. We may be PTSD, but let's have a drink, or
yeah,
something like that."
yeah,
By
yeah,
the way, there was very little alcohol in our house. My
yeah,
father really didn't drink at all,
yeah,
and Stan drank extremely rarely. Maybe a little wine here and there, and that would be about it.
yeah,
But in any case, I would say the first advice I would give is, if a family divorces and there's a kid involved, even if the kid seems fine, get the kid into therapy.
yeah.
One way or another, get the kid into therapy,
Mm,
because the kid needs
yeah.
it.
I would
She may
echo
not
that,
know
to
it.
be honest. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I could have certainly used a lot of therapy back in 1956 after the divorce.
yeah,
I was a quasi basket case. I was upset. I was crying all the time. I felt very lonely.
yeah,
School was there, but I was slipping a little bit in school.
yeah,
After the remarriage, um, I was toggling between two worlds.
mm,
And that's not the easiest thing to do. You have one set of rules in one household, another set in another. Uh, my father's second wife and I'm not going to say we didn't get along, but it was a difficult connection.
mhm,
She was not the best stepmother in the world.
yeah,
But then the second marriage with my father was not very good. In fact, it was
yeah,
poisonous.
yeah,
And my father at one point moved out, was going to get a divorce. Then he moved back in, but he met another woman, Miriam, and they started an affair in 1963, and it ran all the way until he died. Um, which I know because I ran into. It turned out I met her niece at the gym, my gym, and her niece and I are still friends.
yeah,
But it was a total coincidence.
mm,
But in any case, school became the center of my world. That was the stable center, with all my friends from very stable Beverly Hills households,
mm,
or at least stable on the surface,
mm,
an appearance of stability, if you will.
mm.
And most of them were stable. Um, I'm not sure I'm really answering your question.
No, I think you are. What I'm interested in, because one of my ways of managing the turmoil in my childhood around this stuff was to become successful at school.
Yeah,
And I think school for me operated, and I feel sad for a lot of kids who don't get that from school these days,
yeah,
because certainly public schooling has had a lot of attacks on it. But
right.
my school, there were rules. I knew exactly what to do to get approval, and I did it. And I wanted that approval. So I became successful because I felt like I could control that to some extent.
Yeah,
Whereas the other stuff was well beyond my control. But I could
yeah.
turn up to school, I could pay attention, and I could work hard, and I could get approval. And
Well, yeah, you and me, it sounds like we went through the same process, if you
yeah,
will.
yeah,
Um, but, school was, as I said, it really, kept me going, and
yeah.
it worked out. So
So for
fortunately,
me,
a
I
lot of,
compensated very much so because I had the ability to do that. So I had the
right,
academic capacity, and I compensated for the difficulties I felt about my family situation.
I mean,
Sounds like you did something similar.
yeah, I mean, I remember there was this one kid who I found out much later, his father had died. This is
Right.
back in the 6th grade, and he was clearly troubled. He would have outbursts and everything else. He seemed to be a little bit smart. He seemed to be, but you just didn't want to be around him because he
Yeah.
was so troubled and so touched by problems and
Yeah.
everything else.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he did well in school or not. He's disappeared, and it could have gone that way. Fortunately, with me, it didn't. It went the right way.
Yeah.
One thing that's interesting, and I never realized it then. I realized it later as I was writing the book, and that is, none of my friends really knew me completely.
Yes. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
you
they
wouldn't have been
didn't
able to
really
be
know all of
completely
me.
authentic. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't know all of me.
Yeah.
They did. One friend of mine who is still a good friend
Yeah.
met both Stan and my father.
Right.
I didn't know that until he reminded me. We were in a play together in the 6th grade,
Yeah.
and after the play, my father came and was watching, and Larry met him, and his impression was, oh, this very handsome guy, and very charming, and I really enjoyed talking with him that one time.
Yeah.
But he knew Stan extremely well because he was at the house very often. And so, Stan and Larry, along with many of my other friends, and he got to know each other.
Yeah.
But other than Larry,
Yeah.
nobody else met my father.
No,
And the few people I had in his world never met Stan.
I mean, I get that. I understand that absolutely. And that's one of the things that happens in terms of the growth of your identity. There are these strange compartmentalized experiences. It's almost
Right,
like they don't meet.
right.
And certainly my father and my stepfather never met
Yeah,
ever. I mean, it's sort of like, which is strange to think of. It really is, because I think back on that and think, well, what about me? Surely they could have done that for me, but they had their own stuff, as good or
right.
bad as they were. It's really interesting for me, and I wonder what you think about this, is that I mean, you've had an extraordinarily successful life, but you still remember these troubles. And
Mhm.
one of the things that you said, and it surprised me, you said it so strongly. I totally agree with you, but I was surprised when you said, look, if you're going through a divorce, get your kids therapy, because it had a negative impact upon me, even though my life was on track.
Mhm.
Looking back, I would tell you it was difficult and I needed help and I didn't get the help I needed, which is a very powerful thing to say, Tony. And you surprised me when you said it. I totally agree with you. I think that's correct. I'm interested also, when you were on the bench and you had people coming into the courts, defendants, for example, who had troubles, how did your experience impact upon your understanding of those defendants, do you think? Or
Good
was
question.
it just a very simple guilt or innocence, the jury decides? But I wonder.
Well, one thing you learn when
Yeah.
you're shuttlecocking between households
Yes, right.
is you have to learn how to get along in different cultures.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not like living in China one weekend and living in Sierra Leone the next weekend. It's
Yeah.
not that different, but it's different.
Mm.
It might be like living in France one weekend and Spain the next weekend,
Yeah. Quite.
or something
Quite.
like that.
Yeah. No,
The
I get
cultures are
it.
close, but they're not the same.
Yeah.
uh, you know, or pick your country.
Yeah.
It's not as easy as Sweden and Norway.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
but
Yeah.
as I said, it's not like Japan and Zimbabwe. But you're dealing with different cultures, and you have to know how. You have to learn the codes and how to get along, and not make one faux pas after another, if you will. And that's hard to do if you're a little kid, but doing it and at least navigating as I did, for better or for worse, I think made me a better judge
Yeah.
because it gives you the ability to see more than one side of an issue.
Yeah.
You see, okay, this guy, is saying that the defendant is a scumbag. All
Yeah.
right, now I want to hear what the defendant has to say. He's got a story to tell.
Yeah.
And he may be the right one. It may be that he was correct, and the
Yeah.
plaintiff didn't understand it. Um, and the more you can become sensitive to these differences, the better you're going to be as a judge.
Yeah. And better, I think, just as a person as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you one example, which I always will remember. It was a very simple case. It was a car accident
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Santa Monica on
Mm.
Ocean Avenue, right? And it was outside a very, shishi restaurant called
Yeah.
Ivy at the Shore.
Oh, I know
And
the
Ivy
Ivy
at
in
the,
the Shore. It's my least
yeah,
favorite Ivory, but I know it well.
yeah, Ivy at the Shore. It's yuppies go there.
Oh,
A
yeah.
lot of celebrities will hang out there. It's
Just,
the food
just,
costs a lot of
just by
money,
the
and
pier and all that sort of stuff. Exactly.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So they had a witness, a Latino man who gets on the stand and he's saying, uh, I could see everything that happened. My girlfriend and I were having dinner. We were right there, and I could see the street. And cross examination. How could you see the street? There are a lot of palm trees or other trees
Yeah.
between the patio at Ivy and the curb.
Mhm.
So you're not going to get an unobstructed view of the street.
Mhm.
And so he's going, you're at the restaurant. He goes, no, I could see the street perfectly. Well, that's impossible. You're at Ivy at the Shore. He goes, no, no. We were at the Ivy at the Shore, but we were not on the patio. Where were you? Sitting on the curb. They went to an AM/PM mini mart.
Yeah.
They got themselves a couple of burritos or tacos, put them in the microwave, then walked down to that area because it's
Right.
pretty,
Yeah, you
sat
should.
down on the
Yeah.
curb and had their
Fantastic.
dinner because
Fantastic.
obviously they couldn't afford Ivy at the Shore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he had a perfect view of the street.
Yeah. Yeah. And he was also at the Ivy at the Shore in his
Correct.
mind. And that's right. I love that. That's a beautiful story. That's a beautiful
Yeah.
story. Tony, sadly, we've just about come to the end of the show. I forgot to tell you in our pre-show chat that the hour goes like that. Everybody says to me, "Oh, an hour. I can't feel an
It
hour."
does go fast.
It just disappears because I find that people are endlessly interesting. It's an extraordinary story. I'm really genuinely touched by your story.
Well, thank you. Tell
And I
your
would,
audience to buy my book.
yeah, yeah. Where can we get hold of the book? Where is it available?
Amazon.
Amazon.
Amazon sells it.
Yeah.
Barnes and Noble, IndieBound,
Okay.
Thrift Books.
Yeah.
It's available.
So
It's
tell us the
available.
title.
Every
Give
Other Weekend
people
is the title.
Right. Every Other Weekend is the title. Is it by the full name Anthony Mohr or just Tony Mohr?
Anthony J. Mohr. And
Anthony.
the subtitle is Coming of Age with Two Different Dads.
Yeah. Yeah. And sort of a great insight, I think it will be for people. Because as I guess the clearest message I'm getting is that these types of difficult life transitions definitely have impact upon children, and we need to be sensitive to them, and we need to be sensitive to those needs. They don't always end up in this dramatic stuff,
Right.
but you're reflecting upon this thing, and your clear message is that I wish I got therapy during that time. And to be honest, I wish you had as well, you know.
Noel, seeing a psychologist when I was in high school was admitting that you were mentally ill.
Yeah, I know. I know. It's just dreadful, isn't it? Looking at those things. I
That
tell you
was
what, I tell you,
there was one kid in my high school who did admit to seeing a psychologist, and we all thought he was a whack job.
I
It turned
know.
out he was brilliant. He went to
Yeah.
Harvard.
Just
Unfortunately, he died of AIDS.
this, Tony, just today, I had a young man call me who I'd known as a child who wants to go back and do their therapy again as a young man at university. And that's extraordinary. And it gives me great, particularly as a guy, it gives me great hope that this generation of men are going to drop this nonsense around what it is to be a man. And we might finally change those figures because, 75% of suicides are men, and that has
Wow,
to
I didn't know that.
change. Yeah,
Wow.
absolutely. And that's across the world. And it's not because of our genetics, it's because of our culture, it's because of male
Right.
culture. That's why it is. And so to hear you, Tony, it's fundamentally inspiring to me to hear you say, well, when I was a child, I wish I'd had therapy. And it's to all those guys these days, we call them gammon steaks. the men who are angry and say all children now are snowflakes and stuff like that. They need to hear you say this, that it would have helped you. And I would echo that. We're going to have to finish there. So Amazon, every other weekend, Anthony Mohr, get hold of Tony's book, folks, and get a sense of this guy. Wonderful chat to you. You stay there as I say goodbye to folks.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Noel.
Absolute joy for me, to be honest. Absolute joy. Folks, I hope you really got as much from that as I did. I'll see you all at the next show. I don't know who's on the next show because we record these now. I haven't got a list. They just get fitted in. But it's been wonderful to have you. And
great.
wish you a wonderful day.
You too. Have a good night.